This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
Hello, heathens. I'm WyldViolet.
And I'm Transvangelical.
And this is Not Safe for Worship. Here, we talk about the ethics of sex work and sexuality in general through the lens of post-religious trauma. These are deeply personal topics for us, and we strive to delve in with humor and respect, but we do discuss very sensitive and potentially triggering subjects on a regular basis. Please practice self-care and compassion. Take breaks or even stop listening if you need to. We care deeply about you and your well-being.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Not Safe for Worship. This episode, we're going to be talking about dating, especially dating as a sex worker. And if you're thinking that this might not have anything to apply to you because you're not a sex worker, well, that's probably not true because a lot of things are kind of universal whenever it comes to like communication and consent and things like that. I personally am not ever dated per se while being a sex worker. I've been married the whole time. But Violet has some more experience in that area than I do.
I have done a little bit of dating. Actually, the first time that I did sex work, it was a brief stint on OnlyFans, and I was still married at the time. After my divorce, though, is when I kind of really got involved. And when I jumped back in, I jumped in a different way. It wasn't the same kind of building from the ground up and just like a whole bunch of retweeting and everybody and hoping for the best. It was more, intentional business structure. That was, I was in a relationship when I restarted this time around, actually, and then I had a breakup, and then I've done some casual dating, and now I am back in a monogamous relationship. So I've definitely navigated this with a couple of different types of humans. I can't say that makes me an expert. It's always a learning curve. This is a conversation that I'm interested to have. I'm sure that the still currently married one among us probably has some great advice and experiences to share, because clearly you're doing something right.
I mean, I don't know if you can give me the credit for everything because
the two of you.
Yeah, I do have an amazing partner, and one that was very open to listening, especially whenever I brought up the idea of like starting an OnlyFans, and which isn't necessarily always the case because I didn't start. I think we have a cliched idea of how people start OnlyFans, which is like, I'm in desperate need of money, and so this is something that you can do. That wasn't me. I wanted to do it for myself, which is somewhat different. So it was a different conversation, and my partner was cool with it, honestly. And but we do have some ground rules and stuff. If you've noticed. If you follow me on OnlyFans, like I haven't done any collab work. It's because relationally we're not in a place where that's works for us. And we're not necessarily closed off to it in the future. But part of doing sex work and being in a relationship is that communication part, because consent goes in all directions. So yeah, there's just kind of just being able to communicate and talk and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And the communication back and forth to where there is an understanding of what's going on, and everybody is consenting to what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the most important part when we're talking about the concept of ethical dating. Uh, first of all, I guess before I delve any deeper into that communication side of things, I use the word ethical dating as a sex worker. I use that term. And there are a lot of people in the world, and probably almost everyone in the culture that we come from would say that there's no such thing as ethical dating as a sex worker. Um, there is an understanding in the culture at large that if you're showing your body, your nudity to other people, or interacting with other people in any such way, that you're probably untrustworthy, kind of slimy, a cheater, like maybe. And I don't know if that's something that you've experienced, Alicia, but that has been kind of my. There seems to be a pocket of people who think that if you're a sex worker, like you're just dirty, and dating you would not be ethical, and allowing quote unquote your partner to do sex work would be unethical. So
I mean,
so first of all, we got to dispel that idea.
But yeah, I mean, there are definitely plenty of like incels on the internet that say things like, "I would never date somebody with an OnlyFans," and it's just honestly, I think a lot of it comes from a place of insecurity, but it's very ingrained in our culture. It's ingrained that a woman's body, like we've talked about this a lot, it's ingrained that a woman's body belongs to a man. And that's very heteronormative, but that's where our culture is. And so there are a lot of people who think that if a woman is on the internet, like exposing part of her body, she is doing something that is essentially against the man that she is married to or will get married to. And there's generally an underlying like thread of used goods in kind of a way. Like you can't date a sex worker because what good is she? Like that's really kind of that's just toxic type of view of women in general, but it's being applied in the area of sex work, but because it's still kind of seen as this more fringe thing, which is probably good. I mean, I think maybe not. Maybe it would be a bad thing if the majority of people were doing sex work. I don't know, but maybe it should stay fringe.
Market,
yeah, it's already saturated, and we're not even half like majority. So
yeah,
but it's still kind of this like taboo-ish type thing to have a relationship with somebody who does expose their body, because there is an underlying understanding that a woman's body belongs to a man.
Absolutely. And even aside, so there's that cultural understanding that we see. And I think that's a really, misogynistic way of looking at a woman's body. And so much of misogyny is real tied up with or was co-opted from religion. And so, at the religious level, I would say most people, most religions, I would say, have a both that like possession of a woman's body thing, but also that it's a sin thing where this woman must be morally corrupt as well, and would therefore not be suitable for dating. So
yeah, and that's mostly a westernized concept. Not that there aren't other patriarchal societies, because there are. So maybe not Western, but it's
Western religions, or
we're kind of dealing with it within the Western perspective.
That's where
I can't necessarily speak to like Eastern. Yeah, it's where we exist. I can't really speak to Eastern type cultures, but like women's bodies in certain areas don't necessarily mean the same thing. Like there's a reason why Europeans went into Africa and saw like women dressed quote immodest and decided that was a sign that they were sexually deviant, right? Like,
right. And that their culture was behind, underdeveloped. They hadn't learned to
mhm.
cover themselves up yet, as opposed to maybe the fact that like this actually was a development, a step forward because of where they live and their circumstances and environment, and that, you know, we love to do that. But
Exactly.
what's interesting though is most of I would say most European countries have a very different view of bodies and of modesty and of nudity than we do in America as well.
Well, that's because America institutionalized racism significantly longer than other places. uh, just for an example, like the Nazis got their idea for like laws against Jewish people based off of the United States' Jim Crow laws. They just thought that they could do Jim Crow laws better than the United States could because the United States was a little bit more random in how they did it. Like they would allow lynching every once in a while, and then Nazi Germany was like, well, maybe if we don't just have random people doing this, we will just institutionalize it. But like the racism in the United States lasted to the point where like Germany moved away from it, and then the Nazis came in and were like, oh, let's be influenced by the United States. So we we are really good in the United States of holding on to incredibly negative understandings. And
Here
a
in the
lot of
US, we are number one. We
we're not,
win the first place trophy for every terrible competition.
mhm,
Like every competition at being the worst, we're the best.
we're the best. That's just fundamentally true about the United States. And
We sus.
part of it is like the the weaponization of female bodies was so integral to maintaining power over um mostly black bodies, but just any non-white bodies, because the narrative of being sexually deviant was just it was this thing that was developed in in Europe to really be like, yeah, they can't handle being civilized. We need to have power over them. And then
Mm,
like white people owned black slaves, and I don't know if anybody's been in the South. The South is hot. It is very hot in the South. And so, female slaves would wear clothing that was not antebellum white dress, right? Because you can't work in fields in that type of outfit.
right.
And so then it was seen as them being hypersexual because they were out in the
Okay.
fields.
You know what I'm realizing? We got to put a disclaimer on this episode. And I guess this is true of all of them. You know, this is always kind of our opinions and our experiences. But we're talking about the ethics of dating as a sex worker today. And it occurs to me that we can only give you one tiny sliver of that. And that's
Mhm.
from our own white American and like, female identifying perspective. I imagine that a man or a non-binary person or what have I imagine that there is a different probably conception of their work, and different struggles, different obstacles, different biases. So I know we can only really speak, I guess, from our relatively narrow lens. So this just recognizing that while we're discussing ethical dating as a sex worker, there might be some of this that just doesn't make sense to you. But I think that's really the key is that I don't know if there's any such thing as one ethical way to date. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. There is no such thing as one ethical way to date. And kind of circling back to what Alicia touched on earlier about communication, I think that's really what it comes down to. Um, and we're talking about a specific type of communication. There's ethical and unethical communication within
Mhm.
relationships. And this is key whether you're dating a sex worker or not. Ethical communication looks like not quickly just answering with the response that you know your partner wants to hear, and not sugarcoating things or telling half truths or lying outright. It means actually telling the whole truth so that the consent that is communicated inside of the relationship is always given freely and fully with full understanding of what's going on. So I think that's an important thing to know. The type of communication is really important, and it really does matter. We're not just talking about vomiting your every thought onto your partner. We're not just talking about telling them your every fleeting desire. We're talking about communicating carefully with this person that you're meant to protect. That's what it means to be in a partnership, at least. And that's my 2 cents on communication. Anyway, I think how we do it is really important.
Definitely. You used a purity culture term, and I just thought it was so funny. Not that it's not necessarily a bad term to use, but you said your job is to protect your partner, and I just remember how much like that was used for men. Like
Oh my God.
you have to protect their hearts. I know that you weren't saying it that
Honestly,
way, but
you
it's
do. You do have to
yeah,
protect your
it's not.
partner's heart,
It,
but not
not the way
sorry,
that
but
they
not
said it. Like
protecting your own genitals. No.
yeah.
Mm-mm. And not in we're not talking about like codependence where you are you take on responsibility for every single one of your partner's emotions about your feelings. We're talking about like, real actual open communication.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's different.
there are certain terms that were used in purity culture that weren't necessarily the worst thing. They were kind of twisted, but I just thought it was like, oh, hey, I've heard that before. But yeah,
Absolutely. We'd be twisting all kinds of stuff. Those Jesus folks. I think we're going to take some of them back. Although I'm not going
let's
to
do it.
walk around talking about protecting people's hearts because, like, I don't know. That's a little much. I wouldn't
It's
want
a
to
little
hang out with
much.
me. I'll every now and then we'll talk about it. But
But yeah, definitely like communication is completely like you said, there is ethical and unethical communication. And I think that we kind of assume that just talking to a partner or partners is somehow what we're looking for, but just random communication isn't necessarily it. It does have to be honest and like understanding of your perspective and also the other person's perspective, which kind of gets back to I don't know the rambling that I was giving as far as like the historical understanding of bodies is like the way that I was told to have a relationship with my body and how my body is in relationship with a partner's that is kind of unique to myself and it's not universal. So not only do we have a challenge of like we're kind of talking specifically about us in sex work having relationships, but at the same time like the context for every person in any type of relationship is different, and so it does take a lot of more understanding and a more willingness to learn and listen and um honestly a lot of letting like a partner let you know that your assumptions about them can be wrong, which is
Mhm.
sometimes really difficult.
yeah, yeah, and we're talking a lot on this podcast about sexual consent and about consent to the relationship structure, but try to think about consent in all areas of your life. Try to think about, for me, if I'm dating, if I'm in a partnership, if I'm, what I want is shared joy. And one of the only ways to get that is to be really, really clear, I think, um, about like what brings you joy and what doesn't. And so you can do this in all areas of your relationship. Talk about um okay, are there certain words when I meet someone, and especially when I've met someone new, um I will sometimes ask them, especially if they mention that they've had a lot of trauma, like, oh, okay, are there any things that I need to be especially aware of? Or,
Mhm.
are there types of TV shows you don't wanna watch? Should I not sneak up behind you and startle you? Should I be really there's like and it can be different for everyone. So I'll ask about trigger words and the way that they consent to being spoken to, and the way that they consent to being touched outside of the bedroom. Hey, and this is an
Mhm.
important one when you're in a lesbian relationship, especially depending on, where you are in the world. Hey, are you comfortable with public displays of affection? Can I grab your hand in a public place? Can I whatever? So you can really think about this across the board, um and I think asking questions is really kind of the underlying. This is how you get to all of this, to clear communication, to enthusiastic consent. It's just ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to keep asking questions. There are some of us neurodivergents who just want to sit there and go, are you okay? Are you mad at me? Is everything okay? That's not the kind of questions I mean. Again, we're not
Yeah,
talking about
that's
codependence. We're talking about like, how do you feel about this?
yeah.
Is it okay? Is it like when I love to, the colloquial bitch is like a term of endearment for me, but I'll typically ask people first, hey, is it okay if I call you like bitch affectionately? Like, 'cause not everyone loves that.
I
So
so I yeah, I'm generally not necessarily the biggest fan of that, which I know that you've used that for me and like
good to know. See,
if you had said it in a way that bothered me, I would have let you know. Um,
yeah,
but
I
I
appreciate that.
like I
That's clear
um
communication, folks.
yeah, right there. Um, but yeah, like um my partner and I have different levels of physical touch that we are comfortable with outside of the bedroom. And I mean, honestly, probably inside the bedroom too. But
Sure.
because not there are things that are like enjoyable for me that's not necessarily enjoyable for my partner, and that is normal actually. Like,
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
everybody has like different nerves and senses and feelings bring up emotional feelings, and so there's there's honestly there's just so much to talk about within relationships in general, and we're not even talking about the topic, which
Yeah.
is sex work. um
We
but
really we store so much in our bodies, and I just
Mhm.
think it's so important to be aware of your partner's heart, and also their physical body, and also their trauma, and also what makes them tick and what they enjoy, and and theoretically we should naturally want to pay attention to all of these things. For some of us it maybe takes a little bit more effort, but again, I don't know about y'all, but the purpose of a relationship for me is shared joy, and to be able to delight in one another, to be able to depend on one another periodically, to and I think that it's easy to get locked into a relationship that's all about getting our own needs met, um, instead of thinking about the relationship as a whole, and how it's affecting us and the world around us. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
I mean, yeah, it does make sense to me. I uh, a lot of us struggle with the fact that communication isn't necessarily taught to us within the at least the evangelical culture, neither one of us can even speak to like what premarital counseling might look like to if I don't know if people get it, if they're not religious or something, but like
Yeah, mine was
within that,
bogus. It was like at
yeah,
church and, there was a little workbook. I don't
exactly. Uh, and so like we didn't even talk about sex really at all, other than to have the person reinforce that me being the perceived male in the relationship would want sex more than my partner, and that has and hasn't been true throughout our relationship, because it's honestly, I don't know, like sexual interest is actually fluid sometimes, and that's not a bad thing, because everybody has things going on in their life. But I think that we're given such like this cookie cutter understanding of what marriage is supposed to look like that we're not taught to actually talk about things that might be perceived outside of like the Christian marriage. And so we were essentially set up to fail.
I think that those things we were taught that you're not supposed to talk about certain stuff until you're married. But really, when we're talking about clear communication, when we're talking about consent, before you're making a commitment like marriage, if you're consenting to something like that, then really there should be a lot of conversations about what that's going to look like, every
Mhm.
aspect of it. And, I think that that also applies when you're getting into a relationship with someone who is a sex worker, um, or when you yourself are dating as a sex worker. Um, I think just upfront having conversations about uh, what your work looks like, what you're doing, what to expect, what this person would be comfortable with. And I think, before you enter into like a real relationship with someone, I think that that's part of ethical communication, is making sure that everyone understands what your job looks like and what you are and are not willing to compromise on. Um, and for the other person as well, what they are and are not willing to compromise on. Some people are very, very comfortable dating, or being married to people who do a lot of collaborations and a lot of different types of scene work, whatever. There are so many different ways to do, or even full service. Full service sex
Mhm.
workers date, get married. This is not. Many people are set up for that. Many people are, set up for polyamory outside of sex work, and then there are certain people who are, more set up for monogamy. And maybe that also extends to sex work. Maybe they don't feel completely comfortable even for work and again, I would not classify what we do for work as non-monogamy, just to clarify. But some people who are very monogamous in their relationship structure also struggle with the idea of more openness around sexual encounters, even if it is for work. And I think that's the situation that we kind of both find ourselves in, is that we've decided in both of our partnerships that we don't do collaborations with other people right now for work, right? And
Yeah,
that's where you are as well. Mm-hmm.
but also like it's not necessarily a closed conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but not that it would be wrong if it was, because if that's what it needs to be, then that's what it needs to be. But it's part of, I don't know, it's part of that communication aspect, and I I think that it's like it's kind of hypocritical to have a different expectation of, how to engage in communication if you're in a relationship with a sex worker, because like depending on your occupation, you probably should be having conversations about like what you do. Like if somebody goes into the military and they're not letting their partner know that, they could be gone 6 to 18 months at a time. If somebody works for like an oil company and like their partner thinks that that's unethical. Like those are conversations that you
Yeah.
need to have.
Do you
If you
travel a
become
lot to collaborate? Are you
yeah,
gonna be gone? Is it gonna be a lot of long distance? When you collaborate, does everyone do STI screenings? Does your partner always get to see the results of those? Do you get screened, like,
yeah.
after a scene? How do you set that up? What are your boundaries among one another? Like, are you doing, after a collaboration, do you have to come home and wait for a period and do a COVID test in order for them to be comfortable with more physical contact? Like, there are so many things. They
Yeah.
deserve to know
There is a
exactly
lot
what's
more
going
to
on.
be yeah.
Yeah, because it's not just about, like, hooking up with someone. There can be
No,
so
it's
many
not.
layers to that, and so everyone deserves to know exactly what is going on so that they can make educated choices for themselves and their own comfort, health, and boundaries, and that's just so vitally important in literally every single relationship ever. But I think, especially I would say with sex work, I know that like we said, it's still relatively taboo. It's still relatively rare. And every single relationship is different and every single sex worker does things differently. So to date someone new, whether they've dated a sex worker before or not, is to kind of set up a whole new thing all over again, like start from the
Mhm.
beginning with all of those questions. Um,
And
there
also there is kind of like a learning curve also. Like um people do have to be like also have to learn how to be in relationship with a sex worker, as well as the sex workers need to learn how to be in relationship with a non-sex worker, because
absolutely.
it is an experience that is not it's not it's not actually that common. And there's
Mhm.
different dynamics. That's not to say that this is the only relationship dynamic that has a learning curve, but it is one of them.
Yeah.
And so that definitely has to be taken into account.
Yeah. There are, sex workers who would not um, be willing to stop collaborating. That's totally ethical and fine. Just like, don't date someone who's not comfortable with that and lie about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can, whatever it is that works for you, there's a way to do that ethically. And it has so much to do with telling the truth and with, getting consent and with, knowing, honestly, the hardest part is when your boundaries with someone don't mesh or don't make sense.
Mhm.
Um, but
And
it
that can
is a really unique experience, and I think that when you are doing sex work, you are inherently receiving attention in a way that just has the tendency to make the people that you love and give your attention to, um, maybe feel a little bit insecure, and not everyone, I guess, experiences insecurity, but when you are receiving so much attention and you're with someone who is not a sex worker and who maybe doesn't have that experience, explaining the difference between what's real, um, and what's acting, and then also the difference between attention and connection, having a really clear understanding in your mind of what your work is and what your boundaries are with your clients. I think that can also be really helpful so that you can express all of that to your partner. And maybe your boundary is that you have no boundaries, like, all right.
that works
But
for some people.
yeah, okay. Your partner should know that.
No,
And
that's I meant plural, like
yeah,
plural people,
exactly. For
not yeah.
peoples, for persons, for
Yeah.
peoples in relationships. Yeah. I just, I think, oh, there was something else that I was gonna say, and I lost it. Oh, that's what it was. I was watching have you seen, you know who Marcel the Shell is?
I don't know if I do.
Oh my gosh, they were these little, animated YouTube videos, And I think I
Okay.
first saw them when I was in college, and it's this little shell with a face and shoes on. And it was a married couple at the time who created them together. There's the artist that does the animations, and then Jenny Slate was the voice of Marcel the Shell. And Marcel is the cutest. First of all, I'm obsessed, right? Absolutely obsessed. Hello, my name is Marcel, and as you can see, I'm partially a shell, but I also have face and some shoes, and I like that about myself, and I like myself, something along those lines. And just a lot of like, do you know what I use for skis? What? Toenails from a man, you know? And he's hilarious. He's just so cute, and I can't even get close to that. Imitation is cheap. Go watch him on YouTube. Anyway, so then just I think maybe a couple of years ago, they came out with a full-length Marcel the Shell movie. Marcel the Shell with shoes on. It is so, so, so good. But one of the experiences that Marcel has is he sees himself on YouTube. And he's like, whoa, this is so cool. You know, look at how many people have watched me and look at all these comments. And he's trying to like talk, you know, respond to their comments in future videos. He's trying to like talk to them and get them to engage with a certain topic. And later he's looking at the comments on further YouTube videos and they're just like, oh, he's so cute. Oh, this and that. And he goes, but this isn't a community. This is an audience. And I just
Mhm.
like that hit me. I was like, whew, that's it. Because there are people in this world who have become members of my community, but there's a difference between a community and an audience. And there's a difference between your person and a client. And there's this, it doesn't hit the same. Maybe for some people, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe the attention of
I mean,
clients, maybe it's different. But for me, it don't hit. It's not the same thing
it's
as an
not, and
interpersonal relationship.
I think that can be kind of difficult for kind of the two of us who are like very kind of open and ourself on the internet, even though we have like aliases, right? We are still
Mhm.
very much ourselves, and we have now done like public events and things where there is a type of community, but at the same time, because of the work that we do, we have to like kind of have to like toe that line of where does community end and where does audience begin. And
Mhm.
partially I do sometimes worry that I do go very heavily on this person is audience generally, and that
Mhm.
might not necessarily make certain people feel as good, but um it's honestly kind of a safety measure as well, because
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely. We have to. And I think of each human as an individual human,
absolutely.
but it's different to think of them as an audience member than a community member, than someone that
Hmm.
you trust and would also depend on. And this is different. This is someone who's purchasing a service from you. And so customer service, rules, there's a level of professionalism, and that is part of doing this as work. And
Hmm.
that means a few different things. That means confidentiality. That means like a general level of respect. That means clear communication about consent. And that means like appropriate pay and me being able to set the standards and all of these different things. Um, they're, they're having those interactions. It's not that there's nothing personal in it, but it's not for me. It's not a connection for me. It's for
Yeah.
you. It's a service that I offer to you as the consumer. And that is the point, is to
Hmm.
cater to you. So while I do bring a lot of myself to it, and especially to this podcast, there is inherent performance as well, especially on social media, especially when you're dressing up, especially when you're doing collaborations, with people that you've never even met before, right? Like, well,
Yeah.
hey, like, nice to meet you. Let's pretend like we're like obsessed with each other now. Um, and so and maybe you are. I don't know. Like, feel free to collaborate with people you're obsessed with. I'm not saying that's power to you. Um, yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of collaboration that might have obsession in it might be a little one-sided, but that's that's a different topic.
I think that absolutely. I think collaboration is part of doing ethical collaborations, is part of being in ethical relationships. If you are doing collaborations, you also need to be discussing with your partner the boundaries around what those look like. Okay, are they comfortable with you working with another performer who needs aftercare? Are they comfortable with you sharing a hotel room with another collaborator? Is that something that you're trying to do? So all of these things that happen after the camera turns off too. It's really important to discuss all of that, I think. And that can be where a lot of the question marks lie, I think, for a partner, because they don't see what happens when the camera's off.
Yeah. And let's take a quick shift of like the opposite direction of like unethical behavior with dating with at least one partner as a sex worker. Because part of that, like we just talked about, the difference between community and audience. And I mean, part of the reason why I tend to err on the side of audience is because there is an imbalance within a relationship if somebody begins a relationship with an audience type person. And that's not to say that maybe there might be some people who do meet that way, but first of all, if you're paying a sex worker, do not expect that. Please.
No.
Do not become a stalker. Do not understand that a lot of it is a performance.
The idea of dating one of our subscribers, for a lot of us, it sounds unethical. I'm not going to say it is unethical. For me, I don't think that there's any way that I could do it that would look right. There might be, I'm absolutely sure that there have been beautiful relationships that have bloomed that way, and more power to them if they've found ethical ways to do that. But I think it's difficult, like we're saying, because of the power structure, or it can be, to navigate entering into an actual relationship, a relationship with someone you've collaborated with. That might be another like interesting thing to kind of, if you end up developing a relationship. And I can't imagine what any of that would be like, because I myself haven't had those experiences. I've dated from the outside world, but I will say that I do have subscribers who have become friends, or friends who have become subscribers, right? People that I've known for a really long time who are like, hey, can I subscribe? And I'm like, yeah, no shame. And so, and maybe they're people that I still know and periodically see in real life or whatever. But because of the friendship and the professionalism, again, there's this really clear line. And there's this really clear line between WyldViolet and their friend.
Insert real name.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And those things can blur. I do think, at least for me, like even if like a friend becomes a subscriber, which I'm comfortable with, and I do know that people have, but that to me, kind of in my mind, would take them off the table for anything more than a friend. At least at a later time. That's mostly just me, but I mean, at the foundation of it, I think that something would have to come. Like there would have to be a mutual, like equal ground to build off of. That is not where the foundation isn't that the client creator relationship, and I think that it would have to start. Or the foundation would have to be off something else, because like part of it.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say part of it is the fact that people that are seeing us on OnlyFans are seeing something that we put up there, but they're filling in the blanks. They're seeing a very small part, and then they're filling in the blanks. That's not to say that that's bad. that's not necessarily me per se. That
There's
is,
also a difference between admiration
yeah.
and true care, love, affection, whatever. It's you can't really truly be loved until you're known, and you can
Hmm.
only know so much about someone from their online presence.
Yeah.
So if you meet someone that way and you get to know who they really are, there's wonderful if that's able to develop for you. But you also can't assume that the flirtatious relationship that you have with this sex worker actually means anything outside of their sex worker. So you have to, you can't come at us with expectations. Each of us is different, and most of, at least the sex workers that I know or have worked with, would not date a sub. Now, going from sub to collaborator, that I encourage and endorse.
Yeah,
I
that's
have been so lucky and so fortunate, because when I first uh got on Twitter this time around as WyldViolet, I was not doing any kind of sex work. I just was married to a man and thought I might be a lesbian and didn't have any queer friends and wanted to peruse this universe. And it was later. It was later, actually, that I ended up entering into the creation side of things. And so I had people that I had actually followed before they were doing sex work, or sex workers that I followed really early on and maybe like subscribed to when I was like figuring stuff out and was like, oh my God. And then I've been fortunate enough to collaborate with two of them.
yeah.
So sometimes that works out, but
Sometimes
again,
that
keep
works
it
out.
professional, y'all.
Yes, but it's still a profession. At the end of the day, it is a profession.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. But yeah, on the topic of unethical relationshipness within sex work,
Relationshipness. I like it. New word.
relationshipness. Uh, we talked about the fact that communication is key. I don't know. Part of me worries, like, to collecting my thoughts while I'm saying this. I think that a lot of us are just trained so much to just assume that uh, partners are on the same page as us. And so it's actually very easy to, at least, especially early within a relationship or early within starting sex work type stuff, to make an assumption that isn't necessarily held. Like in a new relationship, you've already talked about it, where like a sex worker might assume that collaborations are still fine, and that might not necessarily be true with their partner. There have there's been times whenever I've had an idea of starting something new that like I didn't necessarily bring up with my partner and talk through it first, and that wasn't right. Like I started doing sexting before I told my partner about it, and
Mm,
it wasn't intentionally, something that I did wrong, but it was wrong because that is something else that I hadn't talked to her about. We did talk about it and work through it. There was some feelings about different things, and we worked through it. And she's fine with it now. But like, that's not, when you start something new, you don't just assume. That
yeah.
was bad on me, and that was earlier on in doing this. So I've learned. I did it bad, and I'm trying to be better on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like, each step should be talked about, and sex work kind of being in a relationship with a sex worker, vice versa, does require a level of communication that isn't necessarily expected with other relationships.
Mhm.
Not that other relationships couldn't use that level of communication, but at least societally speaking, it is set up to not necessarily need the same level of communication.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. I agree. I think relationships in general should have so much more communication built in. And I think that a lot of people in non-traditional relationships have probably more experience with that than many of us who have done things in mainstream ways or grew up
Yeah.
in really mainstream traditions, and especially religious traditions. I think all primed to communicate more effectively. Um, I
It does make me think though. I like one thing I've noticed is queer relationships that or just really any relationships that are outside of the normative do require an extra level of communication. And
Mhm.
like I'm kind of curious if like that there's a lot of queer people that do sex work. Like
Yeah.
even even people who do uh heterosexual sex work, still a lot of them aren't just straight.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
True.
bi people.
But, like,
There's
who
and
is, honestly? I feel like we're on a spectrum here. And, the other piece of this too, I think more people than not have some form of neurodivergence. I know that I do, and
Mhm,
that plays into communication and, the things that maybe we don't think to tell our partners, the assumptions that we might make about what it means when they say X, Y, and Z. But, I have had a partner before who grew up in a small town on the West Coast, but then maybe spent a lot of their life in a big city in California. And then I've had a partner who like grew up, in downtown areas of a large city in Arizona, right? And so we're talking about really different experiences and ways of communicating. And sometimes, I'll be with, a newer partner or a more recent partner. They'll say something and I won't even think to question it. It translates, it processes in my brain. This is what I think it means. And I'm running with that explanation.
mhm.
And sometimes that leads to miscommunication. And a
Yeah,
lot of times, like me trying to express what I'm thinking or feeling, there can be a lot of miscommunication. Because for me, when I say I have a feeling, I don't mean this is a final feeling or you did something wrong by causing this feeling or I think that this feeling is correct. I'm just saying I had this feeling,
yeah,
but there's so much to learn about even just like the nuance of communicating with any partner. And so
yeah.
taking that into consideration and just asking a lot of questions at the beginning, I think is real helpful. Make sure you like intersperse that with, not just like, what's your core communication style and how do you handle conflict? Ask them like fun questions too about like, things that bring them joy and their favorite smells and whatever. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
anyway, I encourage lots of question asking and take notes. I do.
Define terms also. That
Ooh, I like it. Say more.
because like anytime just because you assume that what you're communicating is being communicated, if you don't have the same like working vocabulary, then you're you're not actually communicating well. Uh, for instance,
So good.
my partner didn't know what the term collab meant within sex work, and so we had a
Mm.
conversation once about it that was not in the direction that it needed to go because we didn't have the same um we didn't have the same understanding of terms. That can happen in any relationship, in any with whatever you're talking about, especially if you start
Also,
talking about like what you're into in bed and stuff like that.
For sure. And things might come up more than once. Your partner
Absolutely.
might be revisiting something. They might have agreed to something, but they might still have some questions, some thoughts about it, whatever. And we were talking about clarifying terms, and then this other thing came into my head that I just so brilliant. My girlfriend gave me this one, that when your partner comes to you and is telling you about something, let's say it's a struggle that they're having with your work or a question that they have about it, she'll say, and this applies to all types of communication, because even when I'm like having a hard day and complaining about something, she'll say reassurance or resolution, so that your
That's
partner
good.
can clarify what they're looking for. Do, like, when they're coming to you and they're like, okay, so I have a weird feeling about how this thing with your work is going, it can be really helpful to clarify, are you looking for reassurance on the topic? We've already discussed this, but are you looking for reassurance, or are you looking for resolution? Are you looking for a change? Are you looking for a conversation about what needs to be different? And so I think that can also be a really important place to start, knowing which direction you're approaching the conversation from.
Yeah, and that I really like that framing of reassurance or resolution. And it makes
Yeah.
me think of the fact that, like, we were so constantly told that men try to fix problems and women want want to listen to problems, or just want you to hear the problems, don't want you to fix them, which isn't necessarily true. That's a very that that
It's
is a
my own
very
personal
big.
belief that a
Yeah,
lot of that is based probably more around your family structure and your childhood trauma and the way that you learned to deal with your parents and like a million other things.
yeah.
It's not just like gender specific, right?
If it
Some of
is,
us
it's
are like
because
hypersensitive to and trying to meet other people's needs all the time. We're always trying to resolve
yeah,
everything, and who that can happen with both genders. Well, all
yeah,
genders.
and
Excuse me.
yeah, all genders. But at the same time, like, even if that is true, you'd have to, like, then prove that it's not just like we socialize we socialize perceived boys to not share their feelings, which we do as a society.
It's
So
true.
saying that is how it's supposed to be, like, reinforces really negative behavior in raising children. it's it's not a good thing. Don't, like, uh, teach all children that it is okay to share their feelings. Teach all children that it is okay to actually help come up with solutions, and teach children that every person has different times where they need help with a solution, and they need to
Absolutely.
have somebody to vent to.
Feelings demand to be felt. So
Yes.
you can teach your children to internalize their feelings in a way that is damaging to them, that causes damage to their core self. You can you can allow your children to just externalize their emotions in any old fashion, maybe that's damaging to themselves. You can also do that around your kids. Or we can look at their gigantic emotions in these tiny containers, and we can try to imagine what it must be like to have a nervous system on high alert and no tools for dealing with it. And then we can try to give them the tools in order to
Yeah,
navigate.
absolutely. So you're getting relationship advice, parenting advice, and getting everything. Um, but yeah,
Mhm.
we're coming to the end of our time. So, like, just in summary, communication is important. Like,
In
actual
summary,
communication. Yeah,
yeah, in summary,
summary.
don't take this as advice. Honestly,
Yeah,
take
that
it
too.
as the beginning of a conversation. Um, if there's one thing that you walk away with, all ethical relationships are based on honesty and consent. You can't
Mhm.
have any form of trust or respect or knowledge of the other without those things. So honesty, consent, and communication. But at the end of the day, what that looks like, what kind of structure you end up with out of that process is
it's unique to
completely unique to each relationship, not just to each person. Not there. It's not as though I have been the exact same partner in every single one of my relationships, because so it's unique to
or the
every
same
single
person.
couple.
Yeah. Or the same person throughout the entirety of a relationship. Like
Right. I haven't even
the
been the same
people,
partner for that's yeah.
yeah.
You said something
The
earlier
people,
actually that while we're on that I thought was really interesting, because you mentioned that like one of your conversations, it's not a closed conversation.
mhm,
And I think that there are things that we definitely need to say, like, this is a hard boundary for me, and I don't want to talk about this unless I maybe bring it up someday, but like keep it to yourself. But most discussions, I think, I don't think there are many discussions that are fully closed in a healthy, functioning relationship.
absolutely.
It may be really important who brings it up, who opens it. If someone else closed, if your partner closed the door, you don't get to open it.
Yeah,
But if you close a door and then you kind of maybe want to peek through it again, that's the other beauty of partnership. If you have, you know, healthy communication, then you can kind of peek through that door together, which is much healthier than the alternative of, you know, once again, either stuffing your feelings and damaging yourself, or externalizing your feelings in a way that's damaging or sneaky, or, you know, whatever.
yeah, absolutely. That it is
Because people
co-
change.
yeah, people change. They do. Yeah, I've been with my partner since before I transitioned. So people change. It,
Absolutely. Sometimes they just come home with all new genitals, even.
it's not, sometimes that one is a little more planned, I will say, but yeah, I did once leave my house with one set of genitals, and when I came back, I had different genitals. There was like two
People,
weeks
it's
in between.
remarkable, miraculous, the kind of change that humans are capable of,
It's true.
and that we do over our lifetimes. Part of loving someone is being willing to navigate that with them, and
Yeah,
even if that means navigating apart.
yeah, and that's before we end. I do want to touch on that also, just because we do have a concept of the fact that a relationship coming to an end is seen as a failed relationship. And I think that that's
Oh,
a broken, that's a broken understanding. Um, a relationship does not a relationship does not have to be eternal. A relationship can just be what it is. And it coming to an end can be the best thing for the people in that relationship. And that doesn't mean it failed.
you know, no relationship is forever. You either entered into it at some point later in your life,
Yeah.
or it's gonna end before the end of your life. The only person that you're gonna spend your entire life with, will be yourself. And when it comes down to it, even relationships that are really long lasting, the ones that are the longest lasting, I think are and the healthy long lasting ones, the ones with the shared
And there's
joy
a lot of, yeah, there's a
are the
lot of not good
ones.
ones.
Yeah, exactly. Are the ones where it wasn't being together forever that was the couple's main priority. It was the shared joy. And
Mhm.
I think that each different relationship can serve a purpose in our lives, and we can learn a lot about ourselves from dating. I've learned so much about myself. Like I said, each relationship has looked different. I didn't know I had this kind of capacity, and I've learned something from each one. And when for instance, my most recent one ended, um the most recent like real relationship that I had, a breakup, which was, God, over a year ago now. I remember, you know, I had always known that that wasn't going to be a forever relationship. So the breakup didn't feel like a failure. I just remember thinking like, oh, that relationship was really meant for this time in my life, because this was a really dark time. But this was, these were all the things that we were doing, and all of the things that I remember about that time period, even though all this really hard stuff was going on. And so I've been like, that's what that was for. It was never meant to last forever. And so I've been able to like let it go and just be grateful for what it was. And, I think with my current partner, I will say to her, I love you indefinitely. Since I got a divorce, I try really hard not to say to anyone, I will love you forever. Because people do change, and because I don't know what that means, what forever means, or what it looks like. And because I don't see that as being the main goal of the relationship. Like, what if something happens? What if they are abusive? What if we do fall out of love? What if I actually don't have any control over that? Right. So I don't want to make promises I can't keep, again, with the honesty and the consent. Here's what you're getting. Instead, when I know that I want to be with someone long term, when I can like imagine a forever, when I like have no plans of like ending it in the near future, and I'm dreaming about the future, I'll say things like, I love you indefinitely. That I can promise.
Yeah. It seems very honest.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's all the time that we have for today's episode. So if you're in relationship, and relationships aren't for everybody, just communicate a lot about things, especially if somebody's a sex worker or some other like profession that requires communication, because culturally we don't necessarily know how to deal with relationships around that profession.
Absolutely. Oh, and one last little note here that I wanted to throw in at the end. We do have our NSFW email address. We're going to have that down in the show notes. Woo! Please feel free to send us topic suggestions, questions, ideas, conversation starters, your stories, whether or not you want us to share any of your stories on the pod. You can include that information.
Yeah.
And we have some topics lined up. We have some great ideas. We're just brimming with things that we're excited to talk about. But we also want to hear from you, because you're listening.
Yeah, we definitely want to get more audience interaction with all of this.
Absolutely, and we want to know. So far, we've been able to dive into a lot of the topics that interest us or that feel relevant. And we're going to continue to do lots of that. But we don't just want this to be an Our Hobbies podcast. We also want it to be a
start
community, / conversation starter podcast.
Yes. Anyways, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening, and we look forward to our next episode. I was going to say we look forward to seeing you next time, but we actually don't see you whenever these come out because we record them beforehand. Yeah.
We look forward to you putting us in your ear holes next time.
Yes, that one.
With much love. Keep it filthy.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from the Dauntless Media Collective. If you enjoy what you're hearing, we think you'll also enjoy some of our other shows, which you can find by visiting dauntless.fm. Here's a sample from one of them.
All right.
Okay. Welcome to the Thereafter Podcast, a place where we explore life on the other side of faith change.
We're here to break down the binaries, deconstruct the dualities, and wander through what it looks like to live in the gray.
In church, we were told that life after leaving would be a bitter wasteland of unfulfilling hedonism, but we've discovered quite the opposite.
There's actually a vibrant community of people on the other side of faith who are finding and co-creating space for hope and healing.
Come along as we explore the all too often uncharted expanse of evangelicalism, evolving faith, and the life thereafter.
Subscribe to this podcast by visiting dauntless.fm.